the red heifer. We're not going to read about that. The other, of course, is Moses losing his temper and striking the rock. And there have been hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of sermons given over the years about Moses losing his temper and striking the rock instead of speaking to the rock. But we're not going to talk about that either. Rather, I wanted to focus on a couple of things. One is the death of Miriam, and then we're going to have the death of Aaron, and a little piece in which Moses reaches out to the Edomites, those who are, by our tradition, the descendants of Esav, who, of course, Esav and Yaakov had their own little battle, but they were brothers, and so they're a kinsman tribe. So a lot of interpersonal relations that we're going to be looking at, and some wonderful, I think they're wonderful passages from both the commentaries and Talmud and Midrash. So with that, if you needed me to talk about striking the rock, I encourage you to tune in next year, because eventually we'll get back to that rock. I do want to welcome Alan and Mark, as well as, of course, Kathy and Arnie and Lewis and Michael and everyone. So let's say a little blessing for the study of Torah. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kedeshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. So I was going to say, in honor of what Kathy and I were yammering about, that this is the hot topic. But I won't, because anytime you have something that's over 100 degrees, no one wants to hear about hot topics. So let's get to our passage. And I think I've made this large enough. Is that okay? Maybe just a little bit. How's that? So we're going to go over the first 5 verses of chapter 20, and then we're going to skip over the rock hitting passage and get to something else. And the first passage has a piece about the death of Miriam. And so can we have someone read that? Maybe Kathy, would you like to read that piece?
Yeah, sure. Excuse me. The Israelites arrived in a body, literally the entire community, at the wilderness of Zin on the first new moon, and the people stayed at Kadesh. Miriam died there and was buried there. The community was without water, excuse me, and they joined against Moses and Aaron. The people quarreled with Moses, saying, "If only we had perished when our brothers perished at the instance of the Lord. Why have you brought the Lord's congregation into this wilderness for us and our beasts to die there? Why did you make us leave Egypt to bring us to this wretched place, a place with no grain or figs or vines or pomegranates? There is not even water to drink."
Now that leads right into that passage where Moses says, "Yeah, you want water? I'll get you water." And and God said, "Speak to this rock," and then Moses hits it instead. But I wanted to contrast this little piece here, where it says that, here they are at it's Rosh Chodesh. They're in the wilderness. It's 38 years later. It's not as if they are just newly in the wilderness. They have been in the wilderness for a long time. And Miriam died, but that was it. And she was buried there. There's not a great deal of information about how she died and was buried, other than the fact that that's it. She died, they buried, and then the community was without water. Now, avert your eyes for a little bit. I'm gonna scoot down through this passage till the end of this Torah portion, of this end of this section that deals with Aaron and his death. And so, if Kathy, I don't know if you need a little break with your throat, Kathy, or do you want to continue?
No, I'm fine. I was just eating, and
yeah. So this section here It's also chapter 20. It's still chapter 20. It's just that at the end of chapter 20, the beginning was Miriam died and she was just buried. In here, a rather more extensive description and of Aaron's death, and the reaction of the children of Israel stands in stark contrast to what we had with Miriam. And not only do we note the differences and like, hey, why didn't they give the same fanfare to Miriam? Our commentators did as well. So if you don't mind, Kathy, go ahead and read that from chapter 20, verse 23 and following.
Okay. At Mount Hor, on the boundary of the land of Edom, you said to Moses and Aaron, let Aaron be gathered to his kin. He is not to enter the land that I have assigned to the Israelite people, because you disobeyed my command about the waters of Meribah. Take Aaron and his son Eleazar and bring them up on Mount Hor. Strip Aaron of his vestments and put them on his son Eleazar. Okay.
All right.
That's all right. There Aaron shall be gathered unto the dead.
And then?
Moses did as you had commanded. They ascended Mount Hor in the sight of the whole community. Moses stripped Aaron of his vestments and put them on his son Eleazar. And Aaron died there on the summit of the mountain. When Moses and Eleazar came down from the mountain, the whole community knew that Aaron had died. At the house of Israel wept Aaron 30 days.
Right.
All the house of Israel.
Right. All the house of Israel wept for 40 days. So again, in contrast to what we had with Miriam, that Miriam died, was buried. And it just says there. For Aaron, it was a whole thing. It was going to be taken out to Mount Har HaHor, this Mount Hor, to then and make the official change of garments. And then the people wailed for 30 days and mourned for 30 days. Arnie, you had something to share with us.
Just a quick question. What was the waters of Meribah? What did Aaron do? I missed that.
Well, that was that section that we're missing, that we're skipping today. Because that's when the children of Israel had their, they were so upset there was no water. Now, we're going to get into why there was no water in a little bit with the commentary, because in effect, it was because Miriam was a prophetess, and one of the things that she was able to bring as a great gift was being able to identify and find water for the children in the wilderness, which is why on the Passover table we have this special cup, Miriam's cup, that's usually filled with water. So the children of Israel said, "What do you mean? We don't have fruits, we don't have vegetables, we have nothing. We don't even have water." And so these Mei Meribah, these waters of contention, these waters of rebellion, they may refer to the children of Israel who were so upset that they didn't have water. They may also just refer to the fact that Moses, instead of acting in accordance to the highest values of his leadership, instead he said, you rebels, I'll show you, I'll get water for you. And that's the famous passage. So
why did Aaron take the hit?
Well, because they rebelled because he's one of the leaders. I mean, Moses was the political leader and Aaron was the religious leader. So, and they were brothers. So of course, you're going to criticize both of them. And Aaron's been taking a hit. I mean, we had that last week when the rebellion against Moses by Dathan and Abiram, and of course by Korach, and they rebelled most specifically against Aaron. Well, I wanted to focus on the contrast between the burial preparation for Miriam, or lack thereof, and that of Aaron. What were the differences?
Well, they mourned for Aaron. There was a whole ceremony. He came down. I mean, Miriam, they kind of said, "Yeah, she's dead."
Right. Does that not strike anyone else as odd or unfair? just
Well,
not.
doesn't strike me as odd, but it's unfair.
Yeah,
And
good.
I have my own issues with that too. But
Well, I think we all should have some issues with it,
Mhm.
honestly. Now, the 30 days mourning that they had for Aaron, of course, then that was one of the origins of the tradition of Shloshim, that we have not just the 7 days of mourning for Shiva, but also the 30 days of mourning for um, um, extending beyond that. Now, there are restrictions that we have on our behavior during Shiva, and during Shloshim, there's still restrictions, but lesser. But still, the people gave themselves time to process their loss with Aaron, and though they mourned him, they were able to go forward. Eliezer was his son; he was going to continue, and then of course Pinchas after him. But for Miriam, they didn't give themselves a time to mourn. They just buried her. And what was the consequence of not giving themselves a time to mourn? Guys, go ahead and unmute, because I can't hear you when you're mouthing and you don't say anything.
They're they ran out of water. But what I wondered about with Miriam is why she didn't have assistants, why she didn't have students.
Well, there's that, right? Now they still found water eventually. There was an old tradition that they had a miraculous well that would follow them around, and that you'll see a little passage of that in the wilderness. But what happens to us psychologically if we don't give ourselves a chance to mourn? What happens to us?
Comes back and affects you in other ways.
Exactly. Can you elaborate on that, Mark?
Well, you just would feel sad that you never, I guess the word today is closure. You never had closure. I don't know if that's still a thing.
Yeah, it is. So how can that manifest in some of our behavior if we never gave ourselves a chance for closure?
I don't know how exactly it would come back to haunt you, but I think that's what it does. It comes back to haunt you. When times that you're lonely or sad, and you want to think of somebody on good terms, she won't be there for that.
Right. Good. Anyone else?
Well, today during the pandemic, when there was a funeral, a lot of people couldn't go. And there's a lot of feeling from the possible mourners that, I knew the person, whatever, I loved him, and I just didn't have time to pay my respects.
Right. Right. Although even though now they don't even have to get out of their house, they can it's broadcast, right?
Right.
But then again, Alan, I mean, one of the things that we have had, I think we've had tremendous attendance by the broadcast, both for the services, the funerals, but as well as the Shiva. And we've had multiple nights in which there have been dozens, if not hundreds of people who've tuned in and shared stories. It's not the same, but it's still, it's almost like an instinctual need that we have to give ourselves time to mourn. And the children of Israel didn't. Maybe they were just so self-absorbed into their own situation, but regardless, they had this rebellion and this anger, and Moses too then had his anger. And you could extrapolate that, hey, you know what? They did not give themselves time to mourn for Miriam, and that's why it just came out. They have been going through the wilderness, Sinai, which is not a place of great natural water lakes. So they've always been searching for water and trying to make a go of it against all odds. And now, after all of this time, that this is all of a sudden a new issue for them. No, that she died, and that anger just poured out, and then subsequently Moses' anger poured out. And I think there's something there that with that anger that, we said the Mei Merivah, the waters of bitterness, maybe the waters of bitterness were also the fact that we didn't give ourselves the chance. What are bitter waters? They're salty waters. What are salty waters? They're tears. Maybe because we didn't give ourselves a chance to mourn that we had that issue. Arnie.
Yeah, I mean, our whole book's written about the whole process of mourning. I don't know if you have any psychologists, but closure is critical, because if you cannot do that, then that energy, like you said, the anger, it's like whatever, gets buried and comes out other ways. And psychologists, at least, what I've been told,
Right.
surgeon, you can't cut this out.
Yeah.
It will surface. And that could be very well the lesson that the Torah is teaching us.
Yeah. Or at least the lesson that we're deriving from it.
Or deriving from it. Well, or it's teaching us.
Right. So, right. And then, of course, with Aaron, then maybe at that time we had learned the lesson. It's not like, the contrast between Miriam and Aaron, they were brother and sister. So they should have given them both the same honors. But they realized what happened when they didn't give each other, they didn't give a chance for succession. And Kathy, I think your question about what about the successor for Miriam, that's a big part of it as well. The elaborate part that we read at the end of chapter 20 was exactly that for Aaron. They had this preparation. He was dressed in the priestly robes, but in addition to which he had these 4 extra garments that indicated his role as the Kohen Hagadol, the great high priest. And when they took those off of him and transferred it to his son, I mean, not only did that give a transfer of power to give some comfort, of stability, of transference to that sense of stability to the community, but for Aaron, it seemed like they prepared some of this transfer while he was still alive. He could see, at least it's my son, it's my descendants. The traditions that we had built up, they're not just going to fall apart, they're going to be transferred. So everyone had closure, and maybe it was that the contrast from what we had at the very beginning of chapter 20 to the end of chapter 20 is that growth that they learned. That's why I wanted us just to ponder as we get to then the commentary. So you have to close your eyes as I'm going through this again. All right. So these are a couple of comments about the passing of Miriam. And there's an extensive one by Ora Chaim, which I thought was certainly worthy of us looking at. So who would like to read? These are the comments on the passage about Miriam's death and burial by Ora Chaim. So who would like to read that passage?
I'll read it if I can find it.
All right.
Where are we at? Our stages?
Mm-hmm.
Our stages?
I'll make it even larger there for you, Alan. How's that?
All right, I can put my telescope away now. Our sages apparently viewed the expansion as sufficient by itself to describe the Israelites in the most glowing terms.
Right. No. So the expression Kol Ha'edah. Remember, they said that the children of Israel arrived in a body. What it really was Kol Ha'edah, i.e., all of the community arrived. So what's the significance of that? Go ahead, Alan.
There are, after all, 70 different ways of interpreting the text. The reason that the Torah would choose the expression
Ha'edah,
the entire community, here may be the threshold.
Threefold. There's three. He's coming up with 3 different interpretations.
We know that we read shortly afterwards about the incident with the waters of the strife, which is according to Devarim
Rabbah, the midrash that's on the book of Deuteronomy,
was the reason for
Moses'
punishment.
Right.
The reason,
So the waters of bitterness, Arnie, that was what you just mentioned, the Mei Merivah. So then, Alan, continue. The reason
given is that the address that the Israelites, as listen, you religious people. It was
Rebellious people.
okay, excuse me, rebellious people. It was important for the Torah to state that at this time, the Israelites were all a holy congregation. Had this not been so, the Torah could not have been faulted by Moses for addressing the Israelites as rebellious.
Right. So if it was still that old generation that had rejected the promised land and all the rest, it's one thing. But now, no, that previous generation had all gone, and now it was a righteous generation, and it was all of them. We didn't have the rebellions by Korach and Datan and Abiram and all this other group. Now they were all together. They were all righteous. And let's face it, what were they complaining about? They didn't have enough water. They didn't have enough water to drink. I mean, that's not a rebellion against leadership and a challenge for hierarchy. It was rather this most fundamental need that we have, and that is enough moisture to slacken our thirst. So, Louis, why don't you, with your fancy microphone, for God's sakes, read the next part.
Get some use out of it. We're at number 1.
Yes.
It was also designed to raise the image of Miriam in the eyes of the people by showing that although the people themselves were at their spiritual best at that time, their merit was not sufficient to ensure their water supply once Miriam had died. The Torah informed us that contrary to Aaron's belief that the people assembled in order to show their last respects for Miriam, they actually assembled in order to quarrel with Moses and Aaron. Considering the conduct of the Israelites in the verses immediately following our verse, there was reason to assume that they had already descended from their spiritual high before Miriam died. The Torah, therefore, had to describe the Israelites in glowing terms to prevent us from making that mistake.
So all he's doing here is giving different reasons. This should have been 2, and that was 4. It doesn't matter here. So 2 and then 3. The numbering got messed up. Sorry about that. But he's just offering 3 different reasons as to what was happening here. And then he gets into, this is Orach Chaim from the 17th century. Then he gets to this conclusion here. Louis, would you continue with that?
Mm-hmm. This leaves us with the question of why the Israelites did not pay Miriam the kindness Aaron had assumed they were showing for her. According to Moed Katan 28, the manner in which the Torah describes Miriam's death as immediately following by her burial, without a word about anyone mourning her, showed that due to the failure of the well, the people immediately suffered thirst. This preoccupied their mind more than the respect they should have shown Miriam by mourning her properly. The Torah makes this even plainer by stating immediately after reporting Miriam's burial that there was no water for the congregation.
Right. So he's starting this 18th century stage. This is also wondering how come they didn't give it. And he gives a little excuse that, you know what, the reason they didn't spend so much time with Miriam with the burial was that they were immediately stricken with this lack of water, and they were worried about their own health. So now we have a couple of passages. One was from Rabbeinu Gershon that I wanted to get to. Rabbeinu Bachya, a 14th century sage. So who would like to share? Louis, go ahead. Continue. You got the mic, for God's sake.
Okay. Rabbeinu Bachya. The Jewish people remained in the town called Kadesh for many years, as we know from Deuteronomy 146. Our sages have stated that whenever the Torah speaks of Ayah, he settled, this is an introduction to the people concerning experiencing something painful. This is why the Torah follows the report of the Israelites settling in Kadesh with the report of the death of Miriam. Her death and its ramifications became the direct cause of Moses and Aaron not being allowed to enter the Holy Land.
Okay, so he's sort of explaining, well, there's a whole setup here. And then Kitzur Shulchan Aruch, I don't know if you're familiar with it. It's a it's not just the short version of the Shulchan Aruch, which is by Joseph Caro, but the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch gives us a very handy way of making reference to what is the halakha, or the Jewish way of doing certain things. So Shulchan Aruch, Kitzur Shulchan Aruch focuses on something about our mourning practices in the modern day. So go ahead, Louis.
Okay. If one of the deceased persons is a Torah scholar and the other is an ignorant man, the Torah scholar shouldn't be taken out for burial first.
Should
even-
be taken.
Okay, got it. It should be taken out for burial first, even though the ignorant man died first. If there's a man and a woman, the woman should be buried first, even if the man died first. For it is written, and Miriam died there and was buried there, which means the burial was immediately after her death.
So on one hand, it's that she had precedence because she's a woman, and you were very careful about having any disrespect for her. After death, the body starts to deteriorate. You want to make sure that she's given immediate attention. And the other is that she was also a scholar. She was also a prophetess, so she had precedent on both levels. Arnie, go ahead.
I guess, can I put the passage back up, because my question's relative to that.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Please. The passage you just had up, the one with the comment.
Yeah.
Yeah. I guess this is like the second part. Yeah, they're giving an excuse for it. Okay. Basically the way the Torah describes it, etc. What's the background for the first part? It seems to me that's a repeated theme among the rabbis.
You mean the one with Orach Chaim, you mean the very first part here?
No. The idea that if you have an ignorant guy and a Torah scholar, the Torah scholar gets buried first. Based on what?
There's a wonderful section in the Shulchan Aruch that's based on that which is in Talmud as well. Kibud Robo. Kibud Robo is honor to one's teacher. And it's considered that the kavod, the honor that you'd give to the Rabbo, your teacher, is akin to that which you'd give to your parent. And in effect, then the Mishnah goes on and says that the person who teaches you even a single Mishnah, and others say, no, even if he's taught you a single letter, he's your teacher. So it is the hierarchy in Judaism, pardon me, sorry about that. There's a hierarchy in Judaism, not for money or power, but the hierarchy is scholarship. That's why doctor. It's such a big deal for a family if they have a doctor or a lawyer or and even a rabbi in your community to say that, yeah, I'm very proud of this person. But in the rabbinic lore, don't forget the rabbis were rabbis, and they got to write the rules. And for them, it wasn't that I was born as a Kohen or as a Levite. It wasn't that I was the richest. It wasn't that I was the most powerful, but rather the responsibility of being a Rav, one who had mastered the material, who had mastered Torah and the rest of the Hebrew Bible, as well as Mishnah and Gemara and Halakha, someone who could be a teacher to help a community through. And that's what people, I think, ultimately thirst for. We compare Torah to a tree of life, but also Torah as water. That when Miriam died, it wasn't that we were lacking water, we were lacking her Torah. We were starved for what she was offering to teach us. So that's their way of saying that if you had to compare, you show the greater honor to a teacher as opposed to just someone who was wealthy. Now, I'm going to give you one other example of it. There's a wonderful passage. We'll have to go back to our Talmud stories. I believe it's in Chorayot, in which it says that you give honor to a chacham, a Torah scholar, who is a mumzer over a person who is a high priest and is an ignoramus. So it's not hierarchy, it's not title, it's what they have to teach, what they have to give to the community. Go ahead, Arnie and then Alan.
Yeah, I mean, I guess like what struck me is that's a repeating theme. Like I'm studying,
Absolutely.
it's a repeating theme. It's like the rabbis wrote the book. House catches fire. You got to run in, pick up the rabbi first, or etc. But it's not halakha. It's not really in the Torah. I find interesting. Yet here, this commentary combines the second part, which kind of is from the Torah, with the first thing that the Torah scholar comes off. I just found that. I mean, I'm not criticizing.
No, there's lots of similar passages to it, and we do find it in D'Rabbanan. Now, at the same time, a rabbi can relinquish the honor due to him by his students, and there's a lot of ramifications for it. For instance, let's just say there's a rabbi who raised a student who became a rabbi, and that new rabbi, who was the student of the older one, set up his own school and started to have his own adjudication of halakha. Now, by all rights, the new rabbi would have to move to a different town, but the older rabbi could relinquish his prerogative in that case. But those are passages that we'll get to in future events. We got enough today dealing with the death of Miriam and Aaron and the misbehavior of the Edomites. Alan, you wanted to share something too. No, but you're muted now, Alan.
I'm sorry. It's akin to having a mentor. I'm sure many of us here had a mentor, and you have a respect for him that you always have, or her.
Yeah, I agree. But there's one thing about having respect for someone. The other is to have some kind of codified honor. That I'll give you one that we have. If you've ever been to a court of law, when the judge comes in, what do? What do they say?
And you stand up.
Well, they say, please. They don't. You just don't rise because you felt, I want to give this person respect. They will say, please rise. Right. So we do accord to certain positions that kind of respect. So let's get back to our passage. And this one last little piece. This is from Baba Batra in the Talmud. And Louis, I'm going to bug you for one last time, and that's it.
That's fine. The Gemara asks, but with regard to Miriam, it is not written. It is not written by the mouth of the Lord. Rabbi Elazar said, Miriam also died with a kiss, as this is learned through a verbal analogy between the word there, mentioned in regard to Miriam, and Miriam died there, and the word there mentioned in regard to Moses, and Moses died there. And for what reason is by the mouth of the Lord not stated with regard to her? It is unseemly to mention death by a kiss with regard to a woman.
Okay, so now it's a little fine piece. So there's a way of a hermeneutic principle of deciding how to interpret passages in the Talmud, passages in the Torah, and the Talmudic sages would say, look, just as you have this word used in this context, so too it has the same significance in a different context. Moses died there with Pi Adonai, from the mouth of God, literally a kiss from God. It was a painless death. It was a compassionate death. We're all going to die, but some people die in agony. Not Moses. He didn't die that way. And the question is, how come it didn't mention that with regard to Miriam? They said, well, it does. It's just that it's not obvious. It doesn't say Pi Adonai with the kiss of God, but rather it says there, Sham. And just as Sham there meant for that Moses was died in this easy way, in this without agony, so too Miriam. And again, then it gets to that last little piece. that they don't mention all these details out of respect for Miriam, because it would have seemed unseemly to many that there was kissing going on for a woman. But anyway, it's a little far-fetched, but they're struggling with, and I think that's what I wanted to focus on. They're struggling with how come when Moses died and Miriam died, when Moses died and Aaron died, there was this big fanfare, not so much with Miriam. And there's a little, a little tap dancing going around here as the sages in the Talmud and Gemara and commentators later on struggled with that absence. And so they want to create that, yes, there was, and if not there was, then there should have been. And how come they didn't do it? Well, maybe there was simply the shock of it, because they were the children of Israel all of a sudden dying of thirst. And maybe also they just learned what happened when they didn't react. They didn't give themselves time to process the loss of Miriam. And so they learned, and so when subsequently Aaron died, they did something different. And we can parse that out. I think the significance ultimately is in our own lives. I think many of us, if not all of us, can think of times in which we did not give ourselves appropriate time to process a loss. It may not have been a loss of a person. Maybe it was a loss of a relationship. Maybe it was a loss of a job. Maybe it was a loss of some expectation. But we can't underestimate the significance of our psychological needs to process, to mourn, to get through it, and to hopefully grow stronger afterwards. So, anyone?
Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
I have a way sort of far-fetched, but since you're supposed to, they say that the best teacher learns from his students. So maybe that's why she was respected. This is a sign of respect the way they buried her, because they did it quickly because everyone was her student.
Well, I would hope so. I mean, that would be something that you would think. Obviously, there was respect. She was not the one that the children of Israel never railed against Miriam. They did against Moses and Aaron. She was the one who brought water. She was the teacher, a prophetess. So obviously she was held in high esteem. Let's get to one other thing in the relationship. Now, we had how a brother and sister were buried differently. There's another passage in this chapter 20 of Numbers, which talks about reaching out to Adam. And so this is, who'd like to read this passage from chapter 20? Well, okay, Arnie, go ahead. Thank God.
From Kadesh, Moses sent messengers to the king of Edom. Thus says your brother Israel, you know all the hardships that have befallen us, that our ancestors went down to Egypt, that we dwelt in Egypt a long time, and that the Egyptians dealt harshly with us and our ancestors. We cried to you, and he heard our plea, and he sent a messenger who freed us from Egypt. Now we are in Kadesh, the town on the border of your territory. Allow us then to cross your country. We will not pass through fields or vineyards, and we will not drink water from wells. We will follow the king's highway, turning off neither to the right nor to the left. We have crossed your territory.
Okay, so I mean, the first part is that, hey, we're your brothers, right? We're not strangers to you. You know who we are. Adam, again, is the descendant of Esav. Esav and Jacob were brothers. So we're cousins, and we just got out of Egypt. And now we're not going to stay at your house. We're not going to eat your stuff. You can hide your good scotch. It doesn't matter. We're not going to take anything from you. Just let us go through. And yes, our people are going to drink some water or whatever, but what we will it will not be a burden to you at all. And that's, in effect, that's what Rashi is saying. that were both descendants of Abraham. So Or Chaim has a little bit more to share. I wanted to get to his comment as opposed to Rashi. Go ahead. Arnie, would you read this part?
Sure. The reason that Moses underlined the brotherly connection between Edom and Israel was to remind Edom that the discomfort of travel Israel experienced now was not due to recent events, but to their respective ancestors. That he considered both Israel and Edom as being involved in this equally. Abraham's descendants were supposed to experience exile, according to Genesis 15. However, only the descendants of one of Isaac's sons had paid the price by being enslaved in Egypt. Esau and his descendants had not experienced any of that suffering. The least the Edomites could do now was to display some degree of brotherliness by allowing the Jewish people passage to their own heritage. Compare Bereshit Rabbah 82 and Genesis 36:8, where it is explained that the reason Esau emigrated was he did not want to pay the debt Abraham had contracted or at the covenant between the pieces.
Right. So it's perfect. Again, it was supposed to be to Isaac and to Abraham, your descendants will be slaves, but Esau's descendants were not enslaved. We were. So, hey, we took that curse on the chin for both of us. So at least give us a little bit of Rahmanis, right? So let's see what Adam responds. Go ahead, Arnie, if you would continue.
But Edom answered him, you shall not pass through us, else we will go out against you with the sword. We will keep to the beaten track, the Israelites said to them. And if we or our cattle drink your water, we will pay for it. We ask only for passage on foot. It is but a small matter. But they replied, you shall not pass through. And Edom went out against them in heavy force, strongly armed. So Edom would not let Israel cross their territory, and Israel turned away from them.
Okay, right. So now later on, not so much in the Torah, but certainly in the Hebrew Bible, the Edomites are even though they're cousins, they're adversaries, and they are mentioned in the Hebrew Bible as having aided our enemies. And when we were in exile, they mocked us on our way. So it's almost like you can say, well, when you're aggravated at your neighbor, you just may ignore them, right? And so a conflict with someone that you work with or that's your neighbor is on one level. But man, if you have a serious disagreement with a loved one, with a brother or a sister or a cousin, that can really escalate out of hand and get pretty darn ugly. And it does. Lawsuits and recriminations back and forth. And so we have this situation where the Edomites sort of reject the sense of brotherliness. Nevertheless, the Torah doesn't dismiss that relationship. And we're reminded that, okay, they weren't ready to have 600,000 Israelites storm through their land. That doesn't mean that they were bad people. Maybe they're just having a bad day. It's like the grandmother who says, he's still a good boy. Don't hold it. Don't be too harsh on him. He's going through a time. Give him a break. So let's see how the commentaries deal with this. Rashi is a wonderful piece that, hey, of course I'm going to come up with the sword. That's what Edomites do. That's who we are. Remember, Esau was the man with the hunter in the field, and Jacob was the quiet person who had good words. So Arnie, read what Rashi had to say. Yeah, but you're muted. Arnie, you're muted.
Okay, sorry. Lest I come out against you with the sword. You, Israel, pride yourself on the voice which your father bequeathed you as a blessing, saying, we cried out unto the Lord, and he heard our voice. Therefore will come out against you with that which my father bequeathed me, when he said in Genesis 27:40, and by the sword thou shalt live.
Right. Right. So it's sort of saying, hey, that's my character. Your character is to be fancy with words. You know, you're the descendants of Jacob. Jacob, who's Israel. You're Bnei Yisrael. Mine is more from Esav. We are violent people. I don't know if you mind if I have someone else reading, that'd be great. But Arnie, if you're doing great, this is Rabbeinu Bachya, who also is focused on how the hell did Esav get away with not being compassionate.
You will not pass through me. He meant his country. The king referred to the direct route to the land of Canaan. Neither he nor his people made any attempt to hinder the progress of the Israelites when they straddled his country, marching around it through the region known as Mount Seir. This is why Moses referred to this as a positive sense when he said in Deuteronomy 2:29, "As did for me the sons of Esau who dwell in the mountain of Seir." When the Israelites asked permission from Sihon, king of the Amorites, to pass through his land, they meant in the same way as we passed through the land of Edom.
Right. Not officially passing through the land, but they didn't harass them as they went around. So later on, Moses said, hey, just do what, we just need to get to the other side. Because once we're on the other side of the Jordan, then we're going to come around Jericho, and we're almost home free. We're almost there. Let us at least get through, give us some avenue by which we can get to our destination. And so here the commentary says, well, at least Edom let them do that. They didn't harass them totally. And then finally, an extended section from Midrash Rabbah. I'm going to go ahead and move this down a little bit so we don't have to break it up. So go ahead, Arnie, if you don't mind.
Okay. Bamidbar Rabbah, 1915. And Moses sent messengers from Kadesh unto the king of Edom. Thus says your brother Israel. This text is related to Parashat 15.3. Adonai, who will sojourn in your tent, who will dwell on your holy mountain, he who walks blameless and does justice and speaks the truth in his heart, who slanders not with his tongue, nor does his fellow man evil, nor bears reproach by his kin.
Right. So this is from Psalm 15:3. Who will dwell in your holy mountain? The one who doesn't cause conflict with his words, right? And so that is how children of Israel were in comparison to Adam, that they reached out saying, we're brothers. We might have differences, but we're brothers. And I think there's something just to echo with us right now. And right now there's a lot of conflict in this world. Political differences, people of one party of the other, or religious differences. You can point to those who are Jews or Arabs and Muslims in the Middle East and elsewhere, Catholics and Protestants and whomever, right? But to look at the other person and not to emphasize the differences, but rather to emphasize the fact that we're kin, we're human beings, we're brothers and sisters. And so the Midrash Rabbah picked up on that. So continue on. Again, when you have some issue with a person, you would anticipate this person that someone would act with anger, but that's not the case here. Arnie, go ahead.
By universal custom, when a person is engaged in business with his friend who causes a loss, he separates himself from him and does not want to see him. But although Moses was punished because of Israel, as stated in Parashat 106:32, and they provoked wrath at the waters of Meribah, went ill with Moses on their account, he did unload their burden from himself. Instead, according to Numbers 20:14, then Moses sent messengers and said, you know all the trouble that has befallen us. They said to him, you know, when the Holy One, blessed be he, said to Abraham, know full well that your seed shall be alien in a land not theirs, where they shall serve them and be oppressed by them. It was us who had been enslaved while you are free. How our forefathers went down to Egypt,
etc.
Yeah.
This whole subject.
Wait a minute. This whole subject is comparable to two brothers against whose grandfather a promissory note appears. One of them arose and paid it. One day he started to ask a favor from his brother, and he said to him, you know that debt was incumbent on both of us, but it was I who paid it. Do not refuse any of my favor that I'm asking. How our forefathers went down to Egypt. Yeah. What is the relevance of mentioning the forefathers here, as stated in Numbers 20:15? The Egyptians dealt harshly with us and our forefathers. It is to teach you that all the time that Israel is in distress, the forefathers are also in distress. Please let us pass through your land. We will pass through field or vineyard, nor shall we drink. We will not pass through field or vineyard, nor shall drink water from a well. Should it not have said water from cisterns? By this use of the singular a well, the Torah has taught you proper conduct, that though one has at hand his necessity, when he who goes to a land which is not his own, he should not eat from what he has on hand. Rather, he should put aside what he has and buy from the shopkeeper in order to benefit him.
I love that. That's why I wanted to conclude with that. So, why? So when we go someplace, you might say, you know what, I can pack some of my own provisions, and when I go to this land, so therefore I'm not going to be a burden to anyone. And yet, when you go to a place, the shopkeepers there were sort of hoping that you would buy something from them, right? So it's a little derech eretz, a little ethical sensitivity that if you come to a place and you help bring benefit to them, that will help elevate the relationship as well. There's a lot of stuff that we unpacked today. The death of Miriam versus the death of Aaron and how people were dancing around it. The relationship of what seemingly should be cousins, if not brothers, the descendants of Jacob and Esau, one reaching out for some compassion and help, and the other saying, you know what, I'm not going to hinder you going around, but man, you are not coming through my territory. And dealing with some of the scenarios that we find in our own day of how things are not always fair, that there are differences in the way we've been treating gender. And I know that was something that Kathy and I talked about earlier. And also about the fact that sometimes brothers and sisters have not always risen to the level of cooperation and making the best of it. So I thought that those things I wanted to focus on instead of Moses hitting the rock. We'll get the Moses hitting the rock some other time. So that's what I got.
And kind of an interesting lesson. Don't assume anything. And that's the catch. Bringing in the heritage, sure. Except you're 600,000 people stepping in from the desert. I'm not sure I necessarily blame the Edomites for their part.
Right, exactly right.
And particularly the world they're living in. I mean, and reality. I guess I don't know, what was the population of Edom at the time?
Well, it wasn't that large, right? And here's the thing: we're going to get a different reaction for next week with Moab and Balak. King Balak would also saw the children of Israel coming through, and he calls upon Balaam to curse Israel in order to try to turn it around, as if we can manipulate God and manipulate history by curses and blessings and other machinations. So here Adam just said, you know what, you're not coming through, but you can go around. Balak tried to do something a little bit more underhanded. So that's going to be next week's Torah portion. Alan, please go ahead and unmute.
I was going to say again, during this pandemic, I would go to the same restaurants, mom and pop, but going once a week during the pandemic, it was a good feeling for me and a better feeling for them.
I agree. To take care of people who are struggling, and I think that one of the great reactions related to that was when people would go to the restaurant, they would make sure that they would tip even more generously to the servers, saying, "Hey, man, I know that you've been out of a job for a long time. Let me give you something a little bit extra here to help you on." And so sometimes in the Torah that we've given examples of things you want to emulate, and sometimes we're given lessons like, you know what, we could do better. And I think that's certainly the case with Miriam's burial that we should have done better. How many of us felt that there was that there was some time in which you had that you needed to give yourself more time to mourn, but you didn't, and you think back on it and go, you know what? There were some consequences. I know I have. You know. Anyway, so guys, we are going to have a session, lunch and learn on Thursday, and so I hope to see you. Amy, you haven't had a chance to share, but God willing, if you ever want to unmute and contribute.
Well, I tried, but I wasn't, I didn't do it well.
That's all right.
Yeah, I was gonna say that there were issues when you don't deal with stuff, it comes to bite you, and you do things that aren't healthy. And perhaps, as you said, the water was related to maybe her love, her care for the people. And therefore, if you don't mourn that, that becomes more searing, because that becomes a hole. And I don't know how that plays out. I guess I'd have to, I mean, it plays out, but we have to see how that plays out.
Yeah.
You need to come to peace, because before you die, that'd be a big problem. Have all the crap built up.
Yeah, very, very good point. Thank you for sharing. And I hope you do so earlier next time in the
Thank you.
around.
Sorry, I tried, but I had a little Zoom problem here.
I know. You know what? But join the club. We've all been there. Anyway, it's a delight to have you and everyone else.
Pleasure. Thank you.
Yoni, thank you for getting us on. And I look forward to seeing you guys soon.
Thanks.
Thank you, guys.